Yeah, I have. So, good morning to our viewers in the United States and good evening to our viewers in Asia. Welcome to NICE webinar. Today we have Dr. Ashley J. Tellis to talk on India, China, and the emerging new order. Dr. Ashley J. Tellis holds the Tata Chair of Strategic Affairs and is a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, specializing in international security and US foreign and defense policy, with a special focus on Asia and the Indian subcontinent. While on assignment to the US Department of State as Senior Advisor to Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, he was involved in negotiating the civil nuclear agreement with India. Previously, he was commissioned with the Foreign Service and served as a Senior Advisor to the Ambassador to US Embassy in New Delhi. He also served on the National Security Council staff as a Special Assistant to President George W. Bush and Senior Director for Strategic Planning and Southwest Asia. Prior to his government service, Tellis was Senior Policy Analyst at the RAND Corporation and Professor of Policy Analysis at the RAND Graduate School. He is a counselor at the National Bureau of Asian Research, the Research Director of its Strategic Asia Program, and coordinator of program's 15 most recent annual volumes, including this year's Strategic Asia 2019, China's Expanding Strategic Ambition. He is the author of India's Emerging Nuclear Posture 2001 and co-author of Interpreting China's Grand Strategy, Past, Present, and Future. In addition to numerous Carnegie and RAND reports, his academic publications have appeared in many edited volumes and journals. Tellis served on the Chief of Naval Operations Executive Panel. He is a member of several professional organizations related to defense and international studies, including the Council of Foreign Relations, the International Institute of Strategic Studies, the United States Naval Institute, and the Navy League of United States. He earned his PhD in political science from the University of Chicago. He also holds Masters in Political Science from University of Chicago and both bachelor's and master's degree in economics from University of Bombay. Welcome to our show, Dr. Tellis. We are really honored to have you with us. Let me start with the first question of tonight.
Thank you, Pramod. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, so what kind of world order are we going to witness post-COVID-19? Is it going to be a China-dominated world order, or is it going to be a multipolar with many Asian powers, or there would be no change at all?
Well, it's hard to give you a definitive answer to that question because that is really the issue that many people are trying to grapple with at this point. Let me offer a way of thinking about the problem. Because I think that may be more enduring than any answer I give. World order is essentially determined by the fundamental distribution of material capabilities in the international system. That's the base, the relative power of states. Upon that base are erected institutions that reflect the preferences of the great powers. And above those institutions are a set of dominant ideas that shape the character of the system. So when we ask ourselves what the future of world order would be, we have to address the character of each of those three variables. What do we think the distribution of power in the system will be? What do we think about the character of institutions? And what do we think about the character of ideas? Now, when you sort of decompose the problem in that way analytically, I would argue that the post-COVID world order will reflect very much something that we are very familiar with. That is, it will be a world order where the United States is still the preponderant power by all measures of national capacity, with China rapidly ascending as well, which means that at the distribution of capabilities level, the world will be moving towards an asymmetrical kind of bipolarity. It will not be true bipolarity because China does not match the United States yet in terms of comprehensive national power. and will not for at least a few decades. It's hard to imagine what the shape of the world will be after that. But at least looking at it now, China will grow rapidly. It will be a competitor of the US. And so I think of the world as bipolar, but asymmetrically bipolar. The institutions that are essentially institutions that reflect America's investments in the post-war order will come under considerable stress because China will want a greater role in those institutions, or it will create substitute institutions. So the question of institutions really will determine on how much investment the US is willing to make going forward in protecting those institutions it has built. And that is one of the big questions, particularly after the presidency of Donald Trump. And the third level is the level of ideas. I think the dominant ideas in the world will still be broadly liberal ideas, but they will be challenged by different forms of authoritarianism. However, I don't think it will be an authoritarian challenge of the kind that we saw during the Cold War, because even rivals like China have imbibed some elements of the liberal worldview, like, for example, the role of markets and the role of market economies. So if one were to sort of look at it net-net, I think it would be an approximation of the world we already know, rather than something dramatically different. In other words, I don't see even the COVID-19 pandemic fundamentally changing the distribution of power. I don't see it completely discrediting or weakening existing institutions. And I do not see it as posing fatal threats to the hegemony of liberal ideas in the international system, at least not yet.
Like you have already talked about the Cold War, like is there a likelihood of such confrontation into hot war? Like, do you also see a decoupling of economic ties between US and China in near future?
So I think there will be, well, let me answer both questions in turn. I think the risks of conflict between the United States and China are not insignificant. But if those conflicts occur, I expect it will be primarily because China makes the first move and pursues policies that threaten core American interests. I don't see the US as initiating any conflicts with China because the US has no incentives to. But China is a country with, significant resentments, significant fears about US policy, and particularly on acute issues like Taiwan, the South China Sea, the role of Japan in Asia. China has very strong grievances. And so if conflict occurs, it will be because China makes the first move, which creates a situation that forces the US to respond. So while I hope we never enter into a serious kinetic conflict with China, I do not want to pretend that that is not possible. On the issue of decoupling, I think there will be some kind of decoupling that will occur after the pandemic, because globalization is proving costly in some ways to countries like the United States, and it is certainly proving costly to important segments of American society, like the non-college, blue-collar working class, which has suffered because of the deindustrialization of America. And so for both economic and security reasons, I see some decoupling occurring. But the kind of comprehensive decoupling that people often talk about, where the US and China sort of break away from each other, I don't think that's possible. I don't think it's possible for a very simple reason, because China is the only country that I can think of that has the capacity for mass manufacturing of high quality at scale. And there is no other country in the world that has that capability right now. The United States could recreate those capabilities, but they will be extremely costly. So even though decoupling will occur in some areas and in some sectors, I don't think comprehensive United States and China get into a major conflict, a major military conflict, in which case, of course, all bets are off. But if peace prevails, I think decoupling will be gradual, it will be piecemeal, and it will take place amidst still quite significant US-China interdependence.
Let's talk about India-China border standoff that is taking place at the moment. Why has China refused to sort out the border issue with India? Does China want to warn India not to approach United States? Similarly, how India can assert to its territorial conflict with China? Do you think India should rethink its China policy? Should it renounce one China policy?
I mean, this is the $64 million question. Why is China pushing on multiple fronts along the border right now? And my sense is there is no simple monocausal answer. I think what China wants at the end of the day is simply control over territories it has claimed for a very, very long time. And it wants to assert effective control over those territories, partly because it is a part of China's greater national unification project, where Chinese leaders since the Revolution in 49 have made no bones about the fact that they would like to see a great China restored at some point. And Xi Jinping has, in fact, kindly supplied us with the date. He has, identified 2049, which is the centenary celebration of the revolution, as the date where he would like to see China restored to its historic greatness. And so part of it is clearly China's desire to make sure that the territories it believes are its own remain under its effective control. And I think it has been pushed in that direction partly by the changes that it has seen in India, the political changes that have occurred in August of last year with respect to Article 370 and transformation of Ladakh into Union territory, which the Chinese view as an Indian effort to sort of claim territories that China controls or believes should be under its control. And the fact that India has also been gradually modernizing its military infrastructure in the area. I think the Chinese have decided to move now before it becomes too late. Now, this, of course, poses a serious challenge for China-India relations, because the great expectation in India was that there were a series of agreements going back to the 1980s, where both sides had in fact agreed to put the border dispute aside in order to maintain a certain productive equilibrium in their relationship. What the Chinese are now signaling is that whatever the larger relationship may be, they are not willing to advance good relations at the cost of sacrificing their territorial claims. That is the essence of the signal that China has conveyed through the events of the last several weeks. And this puts India in a very difficult position, because India would have preferred to have resolved this problem entirely through negotiations and not through conflict. The Chinese are beginning to suggest that they have a different view. And so in some sense, the ball is in India's court. India has to figure out now how to respond. I think India has done the right thing by trying to negotiate disengagement along the disputed areas right now in Eastern Ladakh. Whether that will succeed is anyone's guess. But the loss of life that has occurred on the night of 15th and 16th of this month, I think really puts the government in a very difficult position, because it suggests that the traditional strategy of expecting, even if it was a cold peace, has not paid off. And so the future of Sino-Indian relations actually, I think, is really a very interesting question, and would be one of the key turning points that I see that will define the future of peace and security in Asia going forward.
Let me move to the next question. How do you think of the mediation offer from Trump on Kashmir issue and recent India-China border standoff? Is it the statement India should expect from United States, who claims to be a strategic partner of India? Can India really trust the Americans in the course of a hostile situation with China? Because John Bolton's recent book mentions that Trump wanted help from Xi Jinping for his re-election.
I don't take, President Trump's overtures with respect to mediation seriously. He's, terribly unconventional president by any standard. And he is prone to shooting from the hip. I think he means well. I think he means well. He wants to try and be helpful. But the fact of the matter is the United States cannot be helpful in this situation, at least not through mediation. So I would urge you and your listeners to pay attention to something else. Not what the president says, because that sometimes has a iconoclastic quality, but rather to look at what the United States has done. And on that count, I think there is room for much greater reassurance, because the US has stood quite steadfastly with India, both in the context of crises with Pakistan in recent times, and certainly in the context of crises with China right now. And the US, in my view, would be willing to actually do even more. But out of respect for Indian sensibilities, we think keeping a low profile and not interjecting ourselves too vividly would be more helpful to India's efforts at securing a disengagement. So when it comes to reliability, I think the real test must be not simply what this president says, but rather what his administration is actually doing. And when you take your bearings from what his administration is actually doing, I don't think Indians should be too concerned about the issues of American support, because we have been much more supportive of India than at any time than I can remember, in the long history of our 70-year relationship.
There is also one section in India basically who says that that India-China border tension is to divert the Indian population from criticizing Modi administration on the handling of COVID-19, decline in economic growth rate, increase in unemployment rate, and its plan to acquire more defense supplies from Russia. How do you look at it?
I don't quite see it that way, because it's not as if Prime Minister Modi stimulated this crisis. I mean, if you really want to adopt a diversionary theory hypothesis, then the diversion should have come from Delhi, because you're absolutely right. The Prime Minister is besieged by a series of problems like slowing economic growth, a COVID pandemic, domestic discontent, and so many issues. But he didn't bring this crisis about. This is a crisis that is being thrust upon him. And so if it's a diversion, it's certainly not a diversion that he is provoked. He has to deal with this. And I think, the Indian people will certainly judge him on his ability to manage this crisis in a way that produces favorable outcomes to India. And thus far, I think he has done the smart thing. So what has he done? I think he's done three things. He's focused on diplomacy and tried to engage China at the appropriate levels to pursue disengagement, which I think is a sensible strategy. Two, he has not relied on diplomacy alone, but has done whatever precautionary military moves are required to protect against further Chinese transgressions. So there has been a military response that is taking place behind the scenes. And three, his government has reached out to key players in the international system and kept them apprised of what is actually going on the border. And at the moment, I think that is really a sensible approach to dealing with the challenge.
Next, like how far is it pragmatic that India should strategically align with the United States by overlooking its immediate neighbor China?
I think India will have no choice but to arrive at some kind of a partnership with the United States. I don't want to use the word alliance because the term alliance has a certain connotation and it requires formal agreements which impose mutual obligations. And India traditionally, as you know, has shied away from alliances in that form. And in my judgment, India will continue to shy away from those kinds of formal alliances unless it is faced with a situation with its back really to the wall. But short of that kind of an extremity, I think India will come closer to a deeper partnership with the United States for a very simple reason. I don't think India has a capacity to successfully balance China today purely through internal means. The gap between China and India has grown dramatically in the last 3 decades or so. And it will be a while before India's internal balancing, which it has time to, will succeed. So at least in the interim, India requires external partners in order to be able to meet the Chinese challenge. And it's not just the United States. The United States is obviously the most important partner. But India needs to build its resilience by deepening its partnerships with countries like Japan, with countries like Australia, countries like Vietnam, even Indonesia and the Philippines, Singapore. So there has to be a wider Asian coalition that India takes much more seriously as part of its efforts to meet the Chinese challenge.
Let me move to like the similar question. Like there is a discussion in India on boycotting the Chinese product. Can India really afford to boycott Chinese goods? What will be its impact on Indian economy and India-China relations?
I think these are pressures that are driven by sentiment at the moment. I'm not sure that a comprehensive boycott of Chinese goods is necessary, nor is it feasible, because there are many areas where China has a comparative advantage and India can benefit from exploiting that Chinese comparative advantage. So where it comes to low cost, low end manufacturing, the Chinese certainly have an edge. And India should not shoot itself in the foot by renouncing access to those kinds of Chinese products. But having said that, I think India needs to be very careful about some larger issues with respect to its economic intercourse with China. So for example, I would be very cagey about allowing China to participate in India's telecommunications modernization, because that imposes real security risks for India in the 5G struggle. I would be very careful about involving China in any area where there are strategic impacts. But other than those narrow areas which bear on Indian national security, I don't see why China has to forego, why India has to forego a relationship with China if it provides benefits to India. In every case, India has to make the judgment based on a very careful cost-benefit analysis.
Second is like there is US-China trade war going on. Do you think it is going to impact China's Belt and Road project, which is a very ambitious plan of President Xi Jinping?
I think the Belt and Road project is already affected, and not because of the US-China trade war. I think there are two elements that are beginning to affect the Belt and Road. The immediate element is that many of the Belt and Road country recipients of Chinese investments have become more and more skeptical about China's intentions and the Chinese methodology, which is encompassed in the Belt and Road. They don't like the idea that their markets will simply be swamped by Chinese goods, They don't like the idea that the Belt and Road sometimes becomes simply a way for China to export its industrial overcapacity. They don't like the idea that many of the projects that are being consummated in their countries use Chinese labor rather than local labor. And they are fearful that many of these Belt and Road projects could end up leaving them with debts that they will be unable to service. So there is growing pushback in many countries against Belt and Road projects. And that is the near-term challenge that China has to deal with. I think the Chinese are smart. I think they're beginning to recognize that there is this pushback and they're trying to adapt. But I see that as the immediate challenge that China faces. Over the longer term, there's actually a much more serious challenge. And that is as the Chinese economy begins to slow down, and it's started slowing down already. As the Chinese population begins to age and China crosses the demographic, makes the demographic transition into being a grayer and older society, will China have the resources to continue to invest in Belt and Road projects, many of whom actually produce very marginal returns? So, it's okay for a while to do investments in loss leaders, that is to invest in projects that don't produce a usable rate of return. But you cannot do that forever. I mean, if you're constantly investing in projects where the rates of return are marginal or perhaps even negative, then at some point you have to ask yourself the question whether this is really in your interest. And to my mind, that's the challenge that China is going to face with respect to BRI over the longer term.
Let us move to the last question for today. Do you think there is a need to change the structure of permanent membership in United Nations Security Council, especially in the context of Asia?
Well, remember, as I said, international institutions always reflect the global distribution of power. The UN Security Council that we sort of organized in the post-war period reflected the global balance of power at the end of World War II. As the international system evolves, these institutions also have to keep pace. And the US, to give you just one example, has come out on record and said that we, will support an appropriate expansion of the UN Security Council. And we have actually already publicly stated that we think both Japan and India would be appropriate candidates for a suitably expanded Security Council. Now, you can imagine that there are many other countries that are unhappy with this policy shift. And whether that expansion takes place itself is a very good question, because there are all kinds of entrenched interests that would have to be overcome. But yes, we understand that expansion is inevitable, and we have made our preferences known about which Asian candidates should be integrated into an expanded Security Council.
Thank you, Dr. Tellis. Thank you for your valuable time. We are really honored, and thank you for your support. We'd love to have you again in the future on some other issues. Thank you. Have a nice day.
I look forward to that. All the best to you, and I hope all of you stay safe.
Thank
Take care.
Thank you.